Welcome to the Conservation Impact Evaluation and Implementation Science Seminar Series. I'm Sheila Reddy from the Nature Conservancy, and together with Rachel Martin from Conservation X Labs and Seb Costello from Conservation International, it's our pleasure to be hosting this seminar today. So, as a reminder, this seminar series is an activity of the Implementation Evaluation Working Group. This working group is one of the newer working groups of the Society for Conservation Biology. And the aim is ambitious. It is to advance evidence-based biodiversity conservation efforts across the globe by supporting the adoption of counterfactual approaches to understanding the impacts of conservation actions and interventions. We're really just getting off the ground, so it would be great to have you all engage more with the working group. So please do that by checking out the website, following us on Twitter or X, and signing up for our email list. At the end of the session today, we'll actually be looking to hear more from you about what you want this working group to do. So please stay on so that you can make sure to share your views. So this seminar series program seeks to share a variety of perspectives from practitioners, academics, and a variety of methodological approaches and topic areas. Today, it's our pleasure to have my colleague, Joe Kiesecker, lead scientist for land and water at the Nature Conservancy, talking about an extremely ambitious, large protection initiative called Enduring Earth. And next month, I'll also be talking about our work more broadly at the Nature Conservancy, advancing monitoring, evaluation, and learning with specific examples from research that we've conducted. As you know, last month, we were hoping to have Jonah Bush from Conservation International. He had a wonderful celebration of welcoming a new family member, so he wasn't able to be with us, but we are looking forward to rescheduling his talk, What Drives and Stops Deforestation, Reforestation, and Forest Degradation, an updated meta-analysis. So before we begin, a small bit of housekeeping. As you know, if you've attended before, we'll start off with a speaker, followed by a moderated Q&A session. You can post your questions in the chat. You can't ask them out loud. Instead, Seb will be gathering them and asking them to the speaker. If it's helpful, please use the live transcript mode. And as always, we'll have the seminar recorded, and that's available on our Vimeo and YouTube channels. And engage with us on social media using the hashtag Tuesdays with Team Counterfactual and tag IDoImpact. So without any further ado, once again, it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Joe Kiesecker. And he also has one of his colleagues and team members, Kay Sochi, on, who can engage in the conversation. And he'll be presenting on Enduring Earth. It's an ambitious conservation strategy and will require an equally ambitious monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. Over to you, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you. Just let me get set up here really quick. All right, share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my slides? Great. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. This sounds like a fun group. Anything that has counterfactuals in the title is got to be a party. As Sheila mentioned, my colleague Kay Sochi is here, and the general rule that I tend to have with Kay is, if there are questions, I'll take the easy ones, and Kay will take the hard ones. So we'll continue that approach. So as Sheila mentioned, I'm lead scientist on our Protect team, Protecting Ocean, Lands, and Water. We lead a team of about 20 scientists that are cut across land, freshwater, and marine. our primary roles are supporting prioritization efforts to help guide where we work on our various strategies, but also really a lot of conservation planners. So the work with Enduring Earth that I'll talk about in a little bit involves a lot of conservation planning to get the what and the where right. And then a growing part of our efforts are around monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Um, and that work extends across the strategies that we have within Protect, and that includes Enduring Earth and PFPs, but also looks at things like nature bonds that it's trying to use refinancing debt as a way to help countries achieve their conservation outcomes. Our 30 by 30 initiative, not going to go into those details because I'm going to spend the time talking about Enduring Earth. Our team also works really closely with tackling climate change, and I just wanted to give a sort of nod and point to some of our work around monitoring and evaluation. We built an AI with Microsoft and Planet that detects where wind and solar are being built that supports our monitoring and evaluation work around our renewable energy siting strategy. So this is an issue that's close to the work that we're focused on. I'm sure you all, Sheila has probably given a good overview of TNC's history with MEL. I mean, a lot of it is focused, and I've been with TNC almost 20 years now. A lot of it is focused on sort of showing the organization how to do monitoring and evaluation. And most of it, I think, is typically focused on intermediate outcomes. And there's a change in the organization, from leadership. We have folks like Sheila that are really leading the effort. And it's definitely a different situation now than it was, 5, 10 plus years ago. So the investments are really being made to change how TNC uses monitoring and evaluation and how it shapes our work. What I'm going to talk about with Enduring Earth is a push to try to move beyond just the focus on those intermediate outcomes, the protection implemented, the conservation plans developed, and really try to get closer to some of the environmental outcomes. That said, I am going to do a pretty high level presentation in thinking about it in conversation Kay and I had. We realized what we're doing is a retrospective assessment of 6 PFP projects that are already done. And we have results in hand. We haven't actually walked those out with some of the project partners because not all of them have been led by TNC. And so kind of realized probably not a good idea to start talking about some of this, what's working, what might not be working, when we haven't had that chance to really run it to ground with partners. So we'll use one project as an example and show some results, but it's more about kind of the general framework. I mean, I know everyone knows this. We have, I think it's such a huge opportunity right now for conservation. There's so much effort and attention to some of the big international commitments, the CBD, Paris Climate Accord, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so there's a huge opportunity to address both biodiversity loss and climate change. What I'm going to focus on is the protection work that the Enduring Earth strategy is focused on. I think that's huge. It's one part of what we need to be doing for conservation, but it's a really important part. So what is Enduring Earth? It's a partnership between WWF, Q, Zoma Labs, and TNC, and it's intended to accelerate ocean, land, and freshwater conservation, primarily through protection. Ultimately, they want to conserve the 600 million hectares, reduce CO2 emissions and threats to biodiversity, which means then we have to make sure we're prioritizing the right places. So we're getting in for places that might be at risk of being converted. And we also really want to influence and strengthen how Indigenous communities are key partners in taking leads in some of those projects. The piece that I think really is the attention turner and why we're focusing a lot of attention on the monitoring and evaluation is the funding. There's going to be, numbers like 4 billion are being thrown around towards how much capital will be invested in the strategy. Having been with TNC for 20 years, it's clearly the single largest outlay of capital for a single strategy that I've seen. So it really requires then that we're taking the monitoring and evaluation a little bit more seriously. This is just sort of, I think, how we see some of the projects supporting some of the conservation outcomes. We're really, the focus of the selection of a lot of the projects is how they can contribute to the 30 by 30 targets, again, to how they can benefit and deal interface with climate mitigation as well as the sustainable development goals. So what's the mechanism that Enduring Earth is using? They're using something called project financing for permanence. It's essentially a big coordinated land or freshwater or marine deal. And it starts with a set of conditions and then a close that cements those conditions into place. So it brings everyone together. They agree on what the planning is, what's needed for conservation. Typically, these are done at a country level, although some have been done at a jurisdictional or landscape level. And it's asking that question: what is the conservation needs for this place in order to maintain them long term? And then, what are the financial needs to support those? So what does a PFP look like? Well, it starts out with this comprehensive plan that again asks, what do we need in order to make sure that protection actions are going to deliver the conservation outcomes we need? So not only designation of protected areas, but improved management, and in some cases, other activities. Side by side with that is a financial plan. So asking the question, so what do you need in order to get the protection done, and to implement some of the management that's needed and other activities? I will say, a lot of this originally, the thought was that the planning would all be done before the deal was closed. I think as we've moved through some of these projects, we're realizing that it's a little more complicated and some of the planning is going to have to happen post-close. But for now, there's still how we're talking about it. A big part of this obviously will be raising the money that is that's identified as a need in the financial plan and create those funding sources that will fund the PFP and what it needs. And then you have the single close, and as the commitments that are identified, the conditions that are identified in the plan are achieved, that's when the funds are released to the government or other partners. And one common theme, I think, across the board is the expectation that early on, the PFP will provide the lion's share of the funding, but over time, the government and other mechanisms will provide some of the funding that will deliver the conservation outcomes. And so this is just a look. I won't go into a lot of detail, but essentially, there a commitment that's made through the plan, a condition. As that condition is met, and the detail of what has to happen is very crystal clear as part of the legal agreement. So let's say something simple like creation of a certain number of hectares of new conservation areas. As those conservation areas are designated, the goal is achieved, and whatever funds that were associated with that need are dispersed to the right partners that will ultimately carry out the action, government or other entities. Key to this is the Conservation Trust Fund. So Conservation Trust Fund, the gatekeepers for this are typically partners in country that are influenced or interact with government as well as other conservation leaders. But their ultimate goal is to disperse those funds as the conditions are met. It provides the flexibility. It allows them to respond quickly. And I think that's the opportunity for bringing in monitoring and evaluation. One of the things that we see for our PFPs is that this will be the source of the monitoring and evaluation funding. So it will be built into the Conservation Trust Fund from the beginning, so that monitoring and evaluation can continue across the course of the project. So quick look, these are the 6 projects that have already been done. 120 million hectares conserved, about 1.5 billion in funding leveraged in a pretty large area. In some cases, I think the maps are overestimating where the conservation has actually happened because there's mostly snapped to the country level, but we'll overlook that. But a significant amount of work, but your jaw drops when you look at the plan for future projects. They really want to ramp up the strategy and really bring in 20 PFP projects by 2030, 600 million hectares, and leverage about 5 billion. So again, this was the real, I think, need for just the potential for reputational risk, for not really understanding where and how the funds have been used and what was delivered. I will say, with the 6 projects that have happened in the past, largely, maybe with some exceptions, the focus has been on intermediate outcomes and not really getting, again, some of those environmental outcomes that we care about. So because of that, we're really trying to push a causal impact analysis that looks at a set of monitoring and evaluation of where we're making our investments, our treatments, relative to control sites. And we'll compare those with a focus primarily on condition, and then be able to estimate treatment effects from our projects. And I don't have to say this to a group that has the name that you have, but so much of the monitoring evaluation work, interpreting what the outcomes are, is it's critical not just to look at where you're implementing your work, but in relative to control sites. You might interpret, pick on this neutral one right here. If you look at it in isolation, you might say, well, the project implement in green, the treatment site is in decline, but in reality, it's in less decline than, say, control sites. So the outcomes in many cases, I think, will be complicated. We're seeing that in some of the retrospective projects. But again, the interpretation of the treatment relative to control is really critical. Again, don't have to say that to you all. The focus is again on condition. How we define condition will be a function of the ecological system. And so this is an example that I'm going to show from Jeff's work in Costa Rica. And the focus really is on leaf area index, which is really, it's a way to measure the density or thickness of the vegetation, and then fractional cover, which is essentially a way to measure the actual cover of the vegetation within a given place. These are, the reason we're really focused on remote sensing is the data is often freely available. We can cover large areas, and we can do it relatively quickly. We're matching the treatment sites are in the case of Costa Rica, where either new protection, which is pretty small in the terrestrial space, but improved management has been implemented with control sites, and really matching those based on human influence, climate, and the ecological systems and ecology of those sites. So finding control sites. This graphic implies that there's a single control site for every treatment site, and that's not the case. There are multiple control sites, but again, we're taking that effort to match the intervention sites with controls that then we can follow and track forward. Quick look at again, I was a little bit nervous, as I mentioned as we started, about trying to show some of the results from some of the sites, and we haven't really walked this through yet with our project partners, and these are projects that we haven't led. In many cases, this one is one TNC did lead within Costa Rica. And so this is comparing leaf area index across the suite of intervention sites, and what you're seeing in color is the outcomes relative to the comparison to controls. And so intervention sites in large part are in better ecological condition than the controls, but the differences are pretty small, and in some cases they're not better. They're actually doing worse, and we could talk a little bit about why some of that is. The same is true for fractional cover. Again, largely an improvement in or maintenance of condition, but it's not huge, and in some cases there's some declines. One of the things that I think is really powerful is right now we're summarizing these to the boundaries of the protected areas, but the data that we're using is actually 300 meters, and so you can actually get a pixel level comparison. And I think for the retrospectives, probably a lot of it will focus on these the protected area sort of scale. But going forward, as we start to implement new projects and we're monitoring these going forward, I think we'll be really interested in some of the pixel level data, in particular in some systems where we might want to do the monitoring, the remote sensing, monitoring and evaluation more frequently. So maybe we can start to detect things that are going off track and give some feedback in this sort of finer scale data and information. I think will be really important. That said, all of the remote sensing data is all well and good, but it doesn't tell us anything about the site-specific characteristics of what's happening in some of these sites. So to complement the remotely sensed data, we're going to use bioacoustics, camera traps to give us a little bit finer point and understanding of what's happening in those sites. And thanks to Sheila, we have actually some funding to do a pilot in Costa Rica that will look at how we can blend some of the remotely sensed data and some of the bioacoustics together. Just like the remotely sensed data, how we define and characterize condition will be a function of the ecological system. The same for the bioacoustics. We might, in some places, we might be interested in a particular suite of species that we're really focused on. And some others might just be looking at the saturation of the soundscape, or getting some record of species compositional changes over time. So it's going to have to be very context dependent. But let me shut up and thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to see this all together in one place. Seb, over to you for the Q&A.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph. And that's don't feel ashamed presenting to a crowd. We are not all focused on causal inference method. We are a diverse crowd, interesting in many aspects. And I think having that vision part of, having a monitoring, evaluation, learning strategy that match an ambitious conservation strategy, I think that's really the kind of stuff that as a working group, we are very happy to see someone like you presenting that. So there's been different questions, half of them specifically on matching and metrics, and others more broadly on the learning experience. So maybe let's start a little bit with some causal inference questions. Just to rapidly recap, what are the kind of matching variables you are using when you do your k nearest neighbor matching? Is it always the same, or is it specific to landscapes?
I'll answer the easy part of that. It is specific to the landscape. I don't know, Kay, if you want to dive in and talk a little bit about some of the specifics, because you're more in the weeds on it.
Right. So we match on distance to crops, development roads, streams, settlement areas, water, and then do on about, I think it was about like 19 climate variables. And then we stratify that by ecological land unit so that we are selecting controls within similar types of systems.
And when you say systems, you talk from a biological point of view, or?
Yes.
Okay. Because we also have questions about, when you select your control, do you have more information about what's happening in this control site? Specifically, what Paul Ferrero labeled like the assignment mechanism. I mean, some areas are treated, others are controlled, but are you doing a matching of observed characteristics, or do you have like probably more, I don't know, like an initial pool of control sites or something like that that will allow you to understand why some areas are treated and not? Is that something that is part of your matching process, or is it essentially based on the observed covariance?
I would say that it's based on the observed. We don't have that. It's actually an interesting point about the historical condition currently.
Okay, so let's say that's a form of matching, yeah, and so that's how to say it. Yeah, there is always ways to add some variables or think about that, but for now you have like a kind of standardized approach to include matching in your monitoring and evaluation strategies. Yeah, so other technical questions from Javier. If you specifically dealing with the parallel trend assumptions, as you may know, there's matching, but you also want to ensure that in the absence of the treatment, control and treated groups will have a parallel trend. Is that something that is also part of the assumption you are testing? Sorry, it seems you are on an academic trial and people want to peer review your matching. It's more, I'm asking as part of a curiosity of, what's part of the assumptions you are testing beyond the matching on observer covariance.
That is actually, actually, Joe, did you want to jump in on that? I was going to say that is actually something we might need to come back to you on. Jeff Evans did the sort of this statistical modeling on our matching, and I mean, I'm certainly happy to follow up on that answer for folks.
That was going to be my response. Was Jeff's in particular on the matching piece is our resident expert, and unfortunately couldn't be here. So yeah.
All right, no, but that's interesting. So a lot potential follow up on that. And as I was saying, it's not a PhD defense today. People are curious, but something that I saw is like when you presented your framework initially, you have the K nearest neighbor matching, and you plug that into a causal ensemble methods. Did I get that correctly? Can you elaborate more a little bit of what's the process there for our audience? Or did I misinterpret your figure?
Do that, Kay, or punt it to Jeff. I don't want to.
Right. So I know the matching happens first. Is that the question? And then we put both of those into the causal modeling. But if there's any sort of more detail, I would have to sort of get back to.
So when you say the causal modeling part is comparing the observed outcomes with the match. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. I guess I was confused because you had the models and maybe you do a further processing. All right, and switching a little bit out of the pure causal inference to start talking about the metrics, especially it seems leaf area index is one of the key outcome metrics that you are using. Can you elaborate more on why you choose that variable? Is it a good proxy for biodiversity and the kind of impact enduring Earth is targeting? Can you elaborate more on the specific metrics?
Yeah, to be clear, I guess leaf area index is not the sole focus for all of the projects. It's one where there is reasonably good information and data on how it works in tropical systems, in particular in Costa Rica. So that's why it was the focus. The condition metrics will change as the ecological systems change. NDVI or other proxies that have those connections with biodiversity outcomes. And so, yeah, it's not going to be a one size fits all. We are, trying to fit condition in a generic way to the local context and local ecological systems. Right now we have projects that are the PFPs that are underway in Mongolia, in Kenya, and obviously very different systems than Costa Rica. And so what works for those is going to be really different. Yeah, I don't want to say, yeah. It looks like you have a follow-up anyway. So
no, actually, I was going to think more broadly. Interest for our researchers in the crowd, if that's data that is like that you share or that you are building. I mean, you are building collaboration out of this. So in case other people want to access data and probably perform their own analysis, is that something that's, I mean, do you store your data and share it, or is part of your internal MEL for now?
Well, so I mean, to be clear, right now what we're doing is taking a look at the six past projects, and trying to, and even the handful of those haven't been around long enough, I think, to really to be able to track them over time. So we'll be able to get baselines for them. They're only a couple years old, so we probably we won't even have six projects assessed where we can say anything about the outcomes associated with the projects, but some of them, yes. I will openly admit this is I would say is a learning process for us. We don't have this hardwired and figured out, and so those six retrospectives will be great opportunities for us to sort of figure out how to make this work going forward. The hope is, well, not the hope. We've used this similar kind of remote sensing monitoring for other strategies, and so we have confidence in it in terms of being able to say something. But we do see the combination of both the remote sensing data and some of the more finer scale data as the sort of general framework for how the PFP projects will be tracked going forward. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, totally.
So can I also jump in really quickly and say that one of the big lessons we've learned from this effort is that is a knowledge management thing, because there's a lot of reasons that the PFPs happen, and they're sometimes in places they're very specific reasons. Unfortunately, we don't always have, for the retrospectives, the documentation telling us why. So I'm thinking about this governance context question that's coming up later. And so the leaf area index is a general way for us to get at changes in ecological conditions, but in the context of actually not knowing if a specific intervention was targeted for a specific reason. And so the knowledge management question moving ahead is something, that we learn, that we just have to track these things a lot better and understand where those actions were applied.
All right. And similar to just your answer, more people ask also if more generally you collect probably more also qualitative data, and probably, I don't know if that was the intent of the question, but also understanding a little bit more of eventual social outcomes beyond all the remote sensing, bioacoustics, and the fine scale data you're collecting and evaluating. Is that part, the social and qualitative parts of
yeah,
of
for sure.
impact also part of your framework?
Yes and no. So to be clear, this work is it's a recognition that most of the monitoring and evaluation that we've done around a lot of our strategies are focused on intermediate outcomes without that sort of, look at the environmental um, uh, returns. The PFPs, each program has a suite of monitoring and evaluation metrics that they will commit to as part of the deal. And again, it gets cemented into the conservation commitments and is then funded by the Conservation Trust Fund. So what we're and in most cases, not in most cases, I think in all cases, those are very much focused on intermediate outcomes. In some cases, some of the social indicators in terms of livelihoods associated with local communities that may be near some of the protected areas. And those are super important. I'm not trying to say they're not, but what's not happening are any looks at these environmental outcomes. And so it may appear as if our framework is focused solely on what we can get from remotely sensed data and some of the local species responses. That's not, that work is sort of part of a broader body of monitoring and evaluation that'll happen through the PFPs.
Fantastic. And for the curious among us, is there publications available that describe the PFPs and lesson learned in general? Is that do you have like resources that people can find easily? Or is
there's the Enduring Earth website, and there's quite a bit of information there. There has been a published assessment of one of the PFP projects that was the Amazon the ARPA project that's looked at rates of deforestation within the protected areas that were funded through the PFP. And so, but to be honest with you, to date, that's really the only one, despite the massive amount of resources that have been put into it, and a significant amount of area and places. So there have been assessments that have been done, I would say, in an ad hoc manner, and so not a sort of really clear, rigorous look at whether the outcomes are being delivered. So this is one step in that direction.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And moving some like bigger picture, moving to bigger picture questions. I mean, it's very rare in our community, or it's not common to have like to see the monitoring, evaluation, learning really as part of the strategy of visions. Can you tell us more about where the idea came from? Was that a strong consensus between your partners to have that, or what's the role of the funder in setting up the schemes? Because if people want to replicate this ambitious monitoring and evaluation learning, how do they proceed? What's your recommendations?
Yeah, wow, it's great. That definitely falls in the question of hard questions that Kay should probably answer, but I'll take a quick stab. I mean, first of all, again, the 6 PFPs, all we're doing right now is these retrospective assessments. I think there is general consensus across Enduring Earth that we need to move monitoring and evaluation to the forefront. We actually see a blending between some of the conservation planning work that will use some of the data inputs that will ultimately be the baselines for the monitoring and evaluation. So those things will, and that's more of what I do is on the conservation planning side. There'll be sort of seamless integration between the metrics for the monitoring and evaluation and data that ultimately go in to design and develop the projects, which I think will ultimately make them stronger. So that said, like I said, there's general consensus around monitoring, a commitment to monitoring and evaluation. But the projects, they're all sort of still in the incubator phase moving forward. So how the rubber hits the road, I think, is TBD. Maybe come back in a couple of years and we'll be able to say, give us a D-. the retrospectives, I think everybody was okay with us moving forward to do that. But like I said, I was a little bit nervous about sharing some of the outcomes and patterns when we haven't had that time with partners. And there's some good stories and there's some maybe not so good stories, right? So how people are going to react to what those outcomes are, I think is a question mark at this point. And um, yeah, I don't know that I have any lessons learned. I will just say, my boss who leads the PFP work, I was very clear that I couldn't work um, for Protect if we did not make the investment in monitoring and evaluation for this strategy, and just particularly because of the resources that were going to be put on the table for these projects. And, so I don't know if that's a lesson. I'm willing to put your job on the line and say, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if we weren't trying to figure out whether these things are actually delivering even some portion of what we think they're going to do.
Okay. And it seems you put a big question marks about how we deal with, I would say, disappointing results or probably negative results. In your map of Costa Rica, you show that sometimes you have like negative results. So for now, you put a question mark on it, or you want to elaborate a little bit more if that call for extra diagnostic, or how do you work with partners to eventually think about corrective measure? I mean, the understanding part, what's going on, and eventual corrective measures associated with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I don't know, maybe Kay would want to weigh in on this one as well. Um, it's we haven't put anything out in the world yet, so I think we will have to sort of figure out how partners feel about some of those outcomes and results. Most of them point to climate-based changes and not necessarily the protection actions. So they're dry tropical forests that appear to be getting hit the hardest. And there's a pretty good body of literature in terms of how some of those systems are responding to climatic changes in Central America. And so I don't think it will be that big of a surprise, and it certainly wouldn't run counter to things that are already out there. What it kind of clearly identifies is that protection in and of itself is not going to be the only thing that is going to deliver what we need on the conservation side. Again, I don't know, Kay. I feel like Kay should answer some of these because they're hard questions. And
No, that I wouldn't have said anything different.
All right. No, thank you, both of you. And more generally, we have questions on the Enduring Earth strategy itself. Especially, you were explicit about the need to attract sustainable funding sources and extra funding, extra capital. Do you want to elaborate on your strategies for doing so? Eventually, if you have an exit strategy, and yeah, so people were curious about your model.
wow, it's also a tough one and not one that and the projects, most of our focus has been on the conservation planning. They're pretty diverse though, in terms of the financial models, in terms of what they need and those projections of how they'll step away from needing the PFP funding. They're, a myriad of things from, sustainable local economic development to just increased funding from government in terms of supporting the protected areas, things of that nature. But it's not one necessarily that I have been in the weeds on, and I think it's also one that's TBD, because many of the projects, even the past projects, haven't been around long enough to know whether those financial models and mechanisms are really going to deliver the outcomes that they hope. And
Okay.
I would probably get dirty looks from all my Enduring Earth colleagues. So
I wanted to hope
that's
I can
reality.
ask you the question saying, and as you raise millions out of this vision, what role of the monitoring, evaluation, learning framework as can help encourage more funders to be part, but it's probably way too early to have that. But that would be interesting to see the extent to which potential donors, investors are sensitive to the huge effort to invest in this reflexive and structured learning exercise as you implement these different programs.
I will say, having been in some of those conversations, that clearly some of the donors are interested. They want to know that there's a rigorous monitoring and evaluation framework in place. And I think for obvious reasons, right? There's significant funding that needs to go into these. And they want to make sure that there's some way to understand that the outcomes they want to see are being delivered from the funds that they're releasing. I will say that probably more than anything, which I forgot to mention earlier, is probably what's really turning, I think the attention from the Enduring Earth partners to some of this is because the donors are pushing for it. So as always, follow the money.
That's universal rule. So I think what's fascinating is really that's part that you say, yeah, that's possible to integrate elements of causal inference in implementation science as part of a strategies, and to be very ambitious and intentional there, way beyond the traditional, let's say, static and retrospective monitoring and evaluation. So that's really a message of hope for many in this room to say, yeah, we can integrate them as part of the conservation strategies. But looking forward, we also are like very impact evaluators, causal inference researchers really wanted to, look more finally at the data, design more, probably more sophisticated or more state-of-the-art causal inference strategies to have rigorous impact evaluations. How do you see, what's your recommendation, for the scientists to work in this space? Not necessarily as part of Enduring Earth, but looking forward, we have like many sophisticated, data collecting framework analysis. So how can this advance, that level of sophistication can be part of visionary monitoring and evaluation learning strategies in the future? I don't know if you have any reflections or that will bring our two communities that are part of the seminar together.
Yeah, I think we're open. I think we're definitely open for collaboration. I think we're using the expertise of a variety of different partners. I don't know, Kay, if you want to talk a little bit about Rainforest Connection and how we're leveraging some of their expertise. I imagine that will be something that is something that we'll continue to do going forward, is, take all your big brains and have them put them to work for some of our projects. But Kay, I don't know if you want to jump in.
No, I'm sorry. I was answering questions in the chat, so I wasn't.
I was just saying, I think one of the things that we'll have to do is look for opportunities, which I think is what your question is kind of, where's the sweet spot between, conservation practitioners, researchers, practitioners, and I think, we're open to those kinds of collaborations. In fact, I think it's a great opportunity for us. Our day jobs are pretty busy, and the ability to do research is really tough, and to be able to publish is even tougher. And so, leveraging those kinds of collaborations, we'd be open to that. So, people are interested, happy to have follow-up conversations to look at how we can find those ways to integrate, again, your big brains into our conservation questions.
Excellent. So that's a message of hope for our community, that there is potential collaboration that can be explored as part of Enduring Earth, and more generally between conservation practitioners and impact evaluation scientists. There is a lot of space where this collaboration can happening, and we can collaborate together to have a bigger and faster impact in associated with conservation strategies. So I think that's the end of the Q&A. Thank you, Kay, for providing written response in parallel. And now I want to really thank you, Joe and Kay, for very interesting your very interesting insights of how you have managed to have like one of the most ambitious monitoring, evaluation, learning framework I have seen as part of this conservation strategy. So now the mic is back to Sheila.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe and Kay. And obviously I sit here at the Nature Conservancy, so I have a bit of bias, but I just want to note that this is a big deal. This is a really big deal, what you all are doing. And thank you for your commitment to it. And thank you for all the tough questions, as well as I love the indication about interest to collaborate. I think it'd be great to see more of that between researchers and practitioners. So with that, as I noted, the working group is still relatively new and is trying to learn from you all what would be helpful in terms of activities in 2024 and beyond. So please use this QR code or the link in the chat to share your opinion so that this working group can better serve you. So we've left a few minutes so you can do the survey before you go on to your next set of activities, or at least take the link with you and find a time to do it later. So with that, thank you again. This was a great seminar today. Thank you for the thoughtful questions and desire to engage. I look forward to talking with you all next month. And in fact, I won't proceed to the next slide so people can keep getting this, but I will be the speaker next month. So I look forward to sharing the broader view of what's happening at the Nature Conservancy with monitoring and evaluation, and highlighting a few examples of what we're doing.